Wholesalers, welcome to another episode of Wholesaler Masterminds Radio. Brought to you this episode, and well, why not every episode, by Brotherhood of the Bag, a wholesaler's handbook, available now at Amazon. And you know, they generally have a little discount, and they'll ship it to you for free. Why not go grab your copy today, he asks. 2 years ago, wholesalers, we had Mark Sanborn on the line. When we had Mark Sanborn, we were talking about things going on during the Great Recession. His book had just come out that addressed the whole notion of really how to succeed regardless of what's going on around you. We're talking about the climate of the Great Recession. Aren't we glad things are really quite different today? But what is no different are the qualifications that bring Mark Sanborn to us today. If you're not familiar, he's the president of Sanborn Associates. Now, they're an ideal lab for leadership development. As a matter of fact, LeadershipGuru.net lists Mark as one of the top 30 leadership experts in the world. He's written or co-authored 8 books, 24 videos, audio training programs on leadership, change, teamwork, customer service. Wholesalers, he's done over 2,000 speeches and seminars in every state in our union, dozens of countries around the world. He's a member of the Speakers Roundtable. He's in the Speakers Hall of Fame. You may know him for his most famous book, arguably, The Fred Factor, and he has just released the update to that, and that is why we are here. Mark Sanborn, welcome to Wholesaler Masterminds Radio.
Thank you, Rob. Terrific to be back with you all.
It's delightful to have you here. So let's talk a little Fred 2.0. Now, if our wholesalers don't know, can you give us a little skinny on the Fred Factor, that was Fred 1.0, if you will, how passion in your work and life can turn the ordinary into the extraordinary? Can you give us the backstory of that? Because that was the bestseller. That was New York Times, Business Week, Wall Street Journal bestseller. Give us the liner notes on that, if you would.
Well, I'm glad to. Fred Shea is a real-life postal carrier who I met when I moved to Denver and bought a house back in 1988. And the short version of the story is most people would think that delivering the mail, putting mail in a box day after day, could be the most undifferentiated, boring, redundant, dead-end job there is. And yet Fred made it really artistry. And as a result of my encounters and experiences with Fred, I wrote this little book that's gone on to sell over 2 million copies. Very gratified because internationally the book has done well in places like India and China, where, frankly, I don't even know how they deliver the mail. But Fred himself continued to work and do an extraordinary job right up until this past July 3rd, when he officially retired after 38 years from the United States Postal Service. But the good news is the principles of the first book, The Fred Factor, and then the new book, which is a completely new book. I think of Fred 2.0 as the graduate level course, the Fred Factor being entry level, and the advanced course being Fred 2.0. There's no redundancy. It is a true extension of the principles. We go deeper and wider. It's all about turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. And really, whether you're a wholesaler or a teacher or a lawyer or a speaker, a husband or a wife, that's really what life is about. You know, how do we take the ordinary encounters, experiences, and moments and make them truly extraordinary?
Well, let's do this. Let's have a discussion about what I know are the 4 basic Fred principles, and with respect to the amount of time that we have today, which is always too brief, of course, let's dive into, or try at least to get through all 4. Let's talk about everybody makes a difference. Tell me more about how that applies, and especially to our listenership, that is to say professional wholesalers.
I think it's a little bit sneaky because most people have been told that they can make a difference. And one of the things that I point out in my work is that when you say to someone they can do something, that also suggests that they can choose not to do something. I always believe that everyone does make a difference. It's not like they can opt out, but that the real question is, what kind of difference did you make? It's about intentionally choosing to bring your A game, to create excellence, to do your best work. And if you're a leader, if you have people on your team that support you and who serve your customers, that means the first job of leadership is to prove significance to others so that they choose to make a positive difference. And at the end of the day, you know, the question is, did you move the ball down the field for our organization? Did you take a loss? Did you enrich the client or customer's experience, or did you diminish it? Did you build a coworker up, or did you tear a coworker down? Because really my point is we need to get past this idea of neutrality. You know, it may be in some distant universe there is a neutrality, but here on planet Earth, when you meet someone who is quote-unquote neutral, you don't think to yourself, oh, they're just neutral. That's why they're not engaging me or helping me or serving me. You think they're indifferent. And as we all know from the cliche-ish research that has existed for so many years, indifference is the number one killer of business and loyalty.
Wow. Okay, Mark, there was so much there. So everybody makes a difference, and on the surface you read that as the quintessential, as you intimate it kind of.
Well, it sounds like a locker room pep.
I was about to say kind of the rah-rah, right? It's
right.
Everybody makes a difference, but you're saying there everybody does make a difference. It's just a question of whether it's a positive difference that accretes to the positive side of the balance sheet or a negative difference that detracts. Is that what you're saying?
I am, and it's not as simple as client service, which I say in Fred 2.0, you know, the Fred factor is always about service, but it's not always about customer service. You know, if you're in the financial side of your business, it's about paying close attention to the financials instead of being sloppy when it comes to attention and nuance. If you're in the operations side, it's about making sure that the warehouse and the inventory system is truly intact. It's about doing what you do, which is ordinary. Everybody has an ordinary day. I mean, we start with the same raw material. It's not like you wake up with an extraordinary day gifted to you. You create it. And so when you're a leader, it's about getting everybody on your team focused on intentionally choosing to make a positive difference every day. Not every moment of every day, because if you did that, you wouldn't get anything done and you'd be exhausted by noon. It's about looking for those opportunities, those significant opportunities in your work where a little extra, a little more effort, a little more innovation or creativity, that little flourish will make a significant difference to someone, whether it's someone internally, a coworker or a colleague, whether it's a vendor, whether it's a third party, or ultimately the customer.
Wonderful, wonderful insights. My mind's going on and on about how to further our discussion with that. But again, we're going to move on to the second one, which is this notion of it's all built on relationships. So Mark, you know, that sounds like and feels like what we've always been said. You know, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and all that good stuff. But what are you saying there?
Well, what I'm saying is that pretty much everything that you offer, somebody else offers, and they can offer it less if they choose to. If they have deeper pockets, they can afford to lose money longer and take away business temporarily. But that the most difficult thing to duplicate is the differentiation in quality of relationship. And, of course, in business, and I've been in business for over 30 years, so I have a little bit of a track record. We like to talk about, we say things like, you know, we aren't your supplier, we're your partner. Or we're not a vendor, we're your partner. And I always ask my clients, you know, what's the difference between a supplier and a partner? What's the difference between a vendor and a partner? And nobody seems to know because they use the words interchangeably. So I always say that a vendor or a supplier is someone you have or share an economic transaction with. But a partner is someone you share an economic transaction and a relationship with. And that's the ultimate differentiator. It's about how we treat and esteem the people we do business with. And it sounds like a real soft skill, except the reality is very few employees, very few salespeople for that matter, have ever been taught how to build relationships. You know, we're supposed to learn it kind of automatically growing up, but if you look at, you know, the state of relationships in general, it's obvious that we didn't all get, you know, a passing grade in the course. So I think we really need to talk about, you know, what is appropriate relationship building? It's not about, you know, taking the client out once a year for the annual, you know, drinking binge and night on the town. It's about really getting to know them at a level where, and this is kind of a nuance to my work that's relatively new, where you're not just choosing to be extraordinary, but you're choosing to help them be extraordinary. And you can help them be extraordinary in terms of profitability. You can help them be extraordinary in terms of their innovation. But you can also help them be better at relationships by showing them what a real relationship looks like. It isn't just predicated on commoditization and price.
You know, I wrote a post recently, and I want to get your take on it. We're going to go down a side street for just a second, if that's okay, because I just put it up yesterday, and it's called A Wholesaler's Heart. And it emanates from discussions I've been having with my coaching clients that are really stuck and very good at the minutia of our business, which is understanding financial markets, understanding their practice, the practical application of those products in their markets back to their customers. But they get so ensconced in that, they forget that the advisor in front of them is a living, breathing heart inside of them, and they can have as much success appealing to that heart as they can appealing to that head. Where do you feel that the heart fits into that? I don't mean to take you off on the left side street, but I know you have a thought about it.
Well, the digressions are sometimes better than what we plan to talk about anyhow. And I have two takes on that. Number one, in the new book, Fred 2.0, I hint at what I think is going to be one of the most important changes in business going forward, and that is the management of emotion. I think that is one of the last untapped frontiers. When I talk about how to elevate the customer's experience, because everybody says, we got to create an experience, we got to manage it. You know what? Everybody creates an experience, and everybody manages an experience. There's no competitive advantage there. The advantage is when you know how to elevate it, how to make it better and different. And I got to go back to a story because I think it is so apropos, both of your posts and what we're talking about, that my friend Charlie Plum just shared. I'm part of a collegial group called Speakers Roundtable, and my wife and I just hosted the group here in Denver 2 weeks ago. And Charlie, for your listeners that aren't familiar, was a POW in the Hanoi Hilton, probably one of 2 or 3 POWs who still speaks, 80, 90, 100 times a year about his experiences. And he told an interesting story about the fact that his brother was a protester during the Vietnam War. And the reason, and I don't want to get the story out of chronology, but just so that you know, the reason his brother was a protester that Charlie found out later was his brother believed that by ending the war, he would be able to get Charlie back. It was really kind of a touching motivation. It wasn't hey, my brother may be in a prisoner of war camp, but, I don't agree with the principles of the war. I mean, it was really he had his heart in the right place. Well, at an event that Charlie's speaking at, somebody asked him about that, about you were a prisoner of war, you served our country. How did you feel about the protesters? And that's kind of a loaded question, right? People have very strong feelings 30, 40 years later about the Vietnam War, just as we do politics today. Yeah. And Charlie said something that was born out of that experience with his brother that I will never forget. I wrote it down. His answer was, whether you were in favor of or you protested the Vietnam War depended where your heart was. And that, to me, just basically says that's what it's about. We often get caught up in the what's, but we don't get to the why. And the why behind everything significant in business and life ultimately boils down to emotion and how we act on those emotions. So we've got to be good at getting to the heart of our businesses, or we're just going through the motions. The success of any business, I guess, and I'm putting words in Charlie's mouth or paraphrasing his, depends on where the heart of the business is.
Wholesalers, if you want to investigate a little bit more of this whole notion of the heart in business and management, go back to wholesalermasterminds.com. In the search box, put in Mark Crowley, Crowley. He wrote the book Lead from the Heart, and he's done a masterful job of talking about the science as well as the emotion of the heart. So that's just an interesting side street. Back to the main drag. You can add value to everything you do.
Well, I would wonder how many of the people listening right now would say, as a wholesaler, I'm just looking for ways to whiz away all the money I make and throw money at clients and value propositions, and, it's about buying my way out of problems. I've never met anybody that would claim that is their goal. And if it's not your goal, then the question becomes, how do you increase your value proposition? And the short answer, you want the long answer, you got to dig a little deeper in the books, but the short answer is you outthink your competition. You replace money with imagination. You replace capital with creativity. And to me, one of the reasons I've stayed in this business, and I'm so excited about it after all these years, is I think business is a thinking person's sport. Ironically, we get into business and we seem to stop thinking. We start looking for easy answers. We start copying and emulating our competitors, and then we start wondering why our success is plateaued or decreased. it's about finding ways, little things you can do every day to pleasantly surprise, delight, and gratify the customer. And that isn't about how much money you spend. It's about how much attention you give to your value proposition.
I'm writing down what you said. I'm paraphrasing it too. Wholesaling is a thinking man's sport. Because wholesaling...
Well, or thinking, well, I don't want to be sexist, a thinking person's sport.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. We do have to be correct in that. Ladies, I apologize deeply.
When you're my age, I have much more empathy for older people since I'm starting to move in that direction, who just got used to using phraseology that didn't have any deep underlying meaning. It was just habit.
But wholesaling is a thinking person's sport because, I talk to folks all the time, and I know that Mark sees them in his audiences. These are folks that they aren't working on the margins of their game. They're doing all those things Mark just said about emulating the competition, not necessarily honing the craft, not spending the right amount of time on the practice. So, boy, that's an important concept to examine within your practice, wholesalers. You can reinvent yourself continually. Okay, so those two feel really connected to me. You can reinvent yourself continually. How does that work?
Helen Keller, I think, said, "Is life not 1,000 times too short to bore yourself?" People sometimes ask me, well, why should I do this? My boss wants me to do it, or my employer wants me to do it, or my spouse wants me to do it. And I always say, well, let's get past that. Why don't you first and foremost live by these principles for yourself? If you really want to inject and infuse meaning and excitement and passion in your life, find some things you can do that make your life and your business more meaningful, more exciting, more impactful. Reinventing yourself simply means getting out of that rut called the daily routine and doing something different. One of the things I'm telling my clients now, and I get some pushback on it, but that's good, because if people don't push back, that means they're not paying attention. I say, neomania is underrated. Neomania is change for the sake of change. And for years in business, we've said it's got to be purposeful change. It's got to be change for the sake of progress. And there's certainly much to be said for purposeful change. But you know what change for the sake of change does? It switches things up. It keeps people alert. It keeps people on their toes. And I think sometimes we should change not because of any grandiose vision or strategy, but just because we really don't know until we do it differently what's going to happen. And if the only thing that happens is I break out of a routine and approach the day with a little more energy, then change for the sake of change does indeed have some value.
Wholesalers, you hear what Mark is saying? Would you take a look at your practice, please? Would you take a look at the routine, right? We all get comfortable in our routine. And heck, I'm the first person to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, about process and how important process is to your practice. But will you look at that and see where you can do a little nip-tuck and add a little change and add a little variety? Perhaps you'll find yourself energized past where you are today. Mark Sanborn, here's the reason, wholesalers, why we have Mark Sanborn back on Wholesaler Masterminds Radio. You just heard 18 minutes of it. Mark Sanborn, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. I appreciate the work you do, and I'm just gratified and delighted to be able to contribute a small part.
Thank you so much. Wholesalers, join us next time for another episode of Wholesaler Masterminds Radio.